16. We're going to get started. I would like to welcome everybody and welcome Sarah. She is from Spektrix, and she is going to take us through approaching an accessible patron experience. So welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much. I'm super thrilled to be here. I'm from outside of Philly. I'm from a little town on the New Jersey border called Pennington. And so I saw this this conference earlier this year and was very excited pre-COVID that I'd be coming down to Philly, had it in my calendar and everything. And then the world happened. So I'm really happy to be here and to be presenting. We are, like Nicole said, today's topic is approaching an accessible patron experience and how talking about accessibility and inclusion and focusing on that can lead to a better experience for all of our patrons. And I'm a firm believer that you should know who you are getting your information from. My name is Sarah. I am a client success manager here at Spektrix. A little bit about Spektrix. We are a ticketing, CRM, and fundraising software for the arts. And what I do in my day-to-day is I help people with how to set up their system and how to troubleshoot it, but I also help advise clients on their accessibility and engagement strategies, which is really where my heart is. I spent several years before Spektrix working at a large regional theater, and while I was there, I ran our front of house department as well as all of the food and beverage side of things for the whole building and our accessibility programs. That included kind of helping to advise on any changes that needed to be made, as well as kind of helping to find new people to come in and do programming. And while I was there, I also worked on a cohort of people who worked specifically within New Jersey, Delaware, and Pennsylvania to help other theaters start their own relaxed and sensory performance programs. And that was through the TCG Audience Revolution cohort, which was a lot of fun. I come to this work largely from two specific areas in background. One, I have always been a theater nerd. And I studied in college sociology and theater, and specifically chose to do those two things so that I could study audience performer interaction ritual, both within the arts and kind of in an everyday type of basis. Also, I have lots of personal experience in the access world. I have two nephews under the age of 10 who are on the autism spectrum. One of my best friends from high school is deaf and hard of hearing. And a quick plug for Clear Mask, which is her company, which is actually clear masks that are FDA approved so that you can use them for individuals who are hard of hearing, as well as individuals like younger kids who need to see people's expressions. So this work is really important to me. I think everybody deserves and has a right to experience the arts and experience the arts with other people. Which is something we have not been able to do a whole lot of in the last couple of months. And I'm excited to get back to it. But I think the game of engagement is changing just a little bit. And we need to very conscientiously think about how we're going to welcome people back into our spaces in a post-corona type of world. So this presentation is going to be about 60% thought leadership, looking through the lens of accessibility to highlight new ways of audience engagement, and also specifically how this is relevant right now, why this is timely, and why access and looking through that lens is really helpful as we're heading out of, knock on wood, this corona era. 40%, this is going to be action questions and ideas to help you head back to your own venue and make your own strategic plans. So the most important question here is, why are we talking about access right now? There is so much going on in the world. There are so many things to be considering. Why is it important to consider access right now in this time and in this space? And I've gotten a lot of questions about this in the last couple of months. A lot of people who are really concerned that accessibility patrons are going to be missed as we head back into real life venues and exhibitions. And why I think we should be talking about access right now is because the way we interact with our access patrons can help us anticipate the needs of our general patron population as we head back into in-person art viewing. People are going to be much more concerned about their safety, about an organization's policies on cleanliness, social distancing. People are going to be a lot more economically conservative when they're making their purchases for the arts going forward, at least for the time being. Return to in-person events and exhibitions is going to bring up all of these new concerns and holdups. Will my family be safe? Will I be able to cancel if something happens last minute? There are tons of different concerns that people are going to have. And this has been a part of access patrons' world for a very long time. Access patrons are far more economically conservative and research-based buyers because they want to ensure that when they go to a venue that they have things like accessible parking, accessible restrooms, they have the ability to get to the bar, they have the ability to get to their seat. They want to make sure that they are taken care of and that they are not considered a burden or that they're not singled out for being different. So patrons with access needs, access requests, tend to be a lot more focused on gathering the data points of whether or not this is a good decision to embark in with that organization, with a specific organization, and financially before they make a purchase. This type of behavior is going to become a lot more prevalent in a larger populace of our patrons. Specifically, we can take a look at relaxed performances and sensory-friendly shows as an example of how we can modify traditional standards of etiquette to move forward and be as inclusive as possible. For those of you who are unfamiliar, relaxed performances and sensory-friendly shows, these are were largely designed for individuals on the spectrum. Basic modifications include house lights come to half, and people are allowed into the venue with tablets. For kids shows, we call them no shush zones. It doesn't quite work the same way for adult shows, but the idea is that we encourage any kind of genuine expression and reaction to the art. And that could be in, that could look like outbursts, that could look like flapping or stimming, and all of those responses are encouraged and welcomed. And it's, saying judgment-free has become to kind of be a buzzword, but it really is a place where not only is it judgment-free, but these performances are meant to include people for whom that is a very natural part of their everyday. Other things that are general etiquette that change for relaxed performances, specifically in theaters a little bit more, are, like I said, you're allowed to bring tablets into the space, mobile devices. Many individuals need these to communicate, so having them with them is really important. Also, food rules are lessened. I know in my personal experience, my nephew, my godson, is the most picky eater of all time. Colors, senses, everything is very specific as to what he will eat. And giving a family the confidence that they can go into a space and bring their own food with them, for a lot of these families, is really, really important. Other modifications that are made are being able to have a space where if you're sitting and you get too anxious or you just can't sit anymore, there's an activity room where you can decompress. There's a quiet room where if you're overstimulated, you can sit in the quiet and just decompress. Both of those spaces, usually we advise that you have kind of a live stream of the show that's going on, just to make sure that people still feel included. They can go in and out at their leisure, and all staff are trained to work with these individuals who present differently than our general classical crowds or our general comedy crowds. Relaxed performances tended to be my favorite days to work because there was so much genuine expression of joy. And that joy came from being included and being allowed to experience and express with family members and with just with a community of people who let people experience things on their own terms. Something that's really important when you're making any kind of accessible modifications are having really clear policies and narratives about what's going on. And this is also going to be really important as we head into post-corona, post-quarantine times. Something specifically that we tend to do with relaxed performances are social stories. And social stories are something that we provide people that have sensory processing disorders who might not necessarily intrinsically understand social cues and social rules, narratives, in the same way that a neuronormative individual might. Social stories could be things like what is going to happen when you get to the theater. Stuff like when you arrive at the theater, you'll have your ticket scanned. When you after that, you can go to the restroom. There's a bar over there. It'll tell you a little bit about what to expect in terms of your pre-show experience or your common area experience. And then as well, what types of things you might see in the art in terms of where you might go, in terms of what characters you might see on stage or what you might experience. Those narratives are really important for, especially for individuals on the spectrum, but this is a concept that we can take with us and use it to manage expectations of individuals as they return to our spaces. Making sure to have really clear policies about anything that's changed and about what they might expect or come to expect when they enter our venues again for the first time in a long time. And making sure that these policies are clear, concise, and they are front and center on any marketing materials or website materials is really, really important. This is an example from one of Spektrix's clients in the UK. Just having an infographic like this that says, hey, we've taken all of these things into consideration. We are practicing social distancing. We are practicing regular cleaning. All of these different elements that are being included, that are being added to our culture for your safety, both inspires confidence and also sets your customers at ease in a way that's really, really important. Some of you might have heard the term radical hospitality. This is something that I've worked in a lot within my years in both the hospitality, resort, and travel industry, as well as food and beverage, as well as the arts. And radical hospitality was a term largely coined by a man whose name is Danny Meyer. He is the founder of the Union Square Hospitality Group, which owns Gramercy Tavern. They also started Shake Shack, if you're familiar with. But radical hospitality is this idea that when you work in tandem with a customer to make sure that their experience is a good one, you have such great potential for customer loyalty, for reattendance, and for just an overall much more enjoyable experience. One of the concepts is deciphering what is customer service versus what does hospitality mean. And customer service is your reactive responses to any concerns customers have. This is your general brand of like troubleshooting. And if you work as a house manager, you know, making sure that seats are right or exchanging seats or anything that could come to your attention. Basically any kind of troubleshooting that might happen during an event or experience. Whereas hospitality is taking that a step further and trying to anticipate the needs of the individuals in your space, especially in terms of access. The more information that you have ahead of time, especially if customers have let you know that they've got access needs, being able to go above and beyond and make sure that person's experience is great by, you know, greeting them at the door or greeting them by name or remembering them the next time they come, having, if they allow it, having dog treats for seeing eye dogs. I made some great dog friends when I worked at a theater. We had 2 different patrons who had seeing eye dogs that had subscriptions. And it was, I think it's partly my personality is I just love being able to share something that I enjoy, the arts. I think we all enjoy the arts to a certain extent, with individuals and make sure that they have a really great experience in a place that we have a certain level of ownership over. And that's a huge part of the model of radical hospitality is the hiring of individuals that really care. You can teach someone to pour a drink, you can teach someone how to scan a ticket, but you can't necessarily teach someone how to care about and genuinely interact with people. And for this reason, Danny Meyer says, and I didn't put it on this sheet because it tends to make people's brains kind of explode and then they don't hear anything else I talk about. Radical hospitality as a methodology puts the customer second. And this is really important. A lot of people who work in customer service say, absolutely no way, the customer always comes first, the customer is right. And the reason that customer service comes second, or sorry, customers come second, is so that you put your staff first. And this is something that I've been trying to fight for as I've worked in hospitality and in front of houses. It's so important that the individuals who deal with your customers on a daily basis feel valued, have a certain degree of agency, and feel safe in their space, and are excited about what they do. If the individuals who deal with your customers on a daily basis feel like they're unheard, or feel like their job is unsafe, or don't feel a connection to the organization, there is so much missed opportunity for really wonderful interactions. A lot of people use the buzzwords surprise and delight. And I've been in a lot of experiences where general managers, managing directors, they want this radical method of hospitality. They want this surprise and delight, but they don't invest in the people who are there exacting those things on a daily basis. When you invest in those individuals who are your frontline, your box office sales team, your front of house team, your volunteers, those individuals have such a phenomenal vantage point, not only to give your customers an incredible experience, but also to relay back any issues that could be solvable. Those individuals have the power to go back to the policymakers and say, hey, I see what you were trying to do here, but Mrs. Smith came in and said that this missed the mark in this way. That going back and forth, the ability to have that firsthand qualitative experience is really, really invaluable when it comes to crafting your engagement strategy. It's so important to build customer loyalty through confidence, compassion, and consideration. In previous years, prior to everything that's happened in 2020, there was an engagement model that very much focused on experience. Previous models of engagement really talked about subscriptions in a way that put profit ahead of direct customer interactions. And what I mean by that is that there was this, everybody's heard this, the model of how do you get a first-time patron to come back, that reattendance, and how do you get that reattender to make a donation, and then how do you get that first-time donor to be a subscriber? And that pathway does have merit to it, but it doesn't include in its paradigm the ability to capture loyalty through really good hospitality. When you build customer loyalty in this way, what happens is you create a space that people want to come back to. They might not necessarily, when I've worked at venues, I'd had people that only came to see the Grateful Dead cover band, or only came to see a certain show or follow a certain artist. But if they have a really positive experience in the lobbies, in the common areas, and with our staff, that opens the door for them to come back and reattend for something they might not have before. And especially with the millennial buying power, there's lots that can be said about how to engage with millennials, but generally what people want to see is a really good experience while they're there. You can buy tickets to an exhibition that you know you're going to like. You can buy tickets to a concert that you know you're going to like. But if the experience from parking your car to getting to your seat or parking your car and getting into the venue is bad, they're never going to come back. Whereas if it's a good, positive one, and you have customer service individuals who go above and beyond to make sure that experience is enjoyable, now you've built someone who's loyal to your organization, who's going to come back and who's going to spread that word of mouth overall. We are in an age where people are super wired and super dangerous in terms of your Google reviews, Yelp reviews, Twitter. People will get online to complain, but they'll also get online and say, hey, this was the best thing I ever experienced. And building that loyalty through positive experiences is very, very important. And this is a direct quote from Danny Meyer. He said, the way you make people feel is what they remember more than anything. This This is his book, Setting the Table. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. Specifically, he comes from a focus of the food industry, but it's really applicable to everything from the hospitality, travel, and leisure industry, as well as our arts industry. So we can talk about theory all day long, but at some point, we need some kind of data to evaluate how we're doing. A lot of times, data is only mined in a really quantitative way, and it's really important to think about how you're going to collect your data and do it in a way that is filled with integrity and also gets you what you need. So good metrics are, most importantly, ethically sourced. It's so important to be very ethical and deliberate about how you collect your information. If, for example, when I first started in a house management position, the way that we collected demographic information was the house manager was given a sheet at the end of the night, and we were asked to count how many people of different races we thought there were, how many people of certain disabilities were in the audience. And there is so much there to unpack about why that's not okay that we're not even going to go into it. The best and most ethical way to source your data is straight from the individuals. Get their permission, get their consent, whether it's a form, a survey that they fill out where they mark their own identifiers. That's going to be the most accurate data that you can have, because as a house manager, I can sit here all day and say, you look like you might identify as one thing, but I could be completely wrong. And anything other than self-reported data in these cases is just not, it's misleading, it's probably inaccurate, and if that data is being used for funding purposes, it's just not quite right. So you want your data to be ethically sourced. You want your data to come directly from the people that you're trying to evaluate, and you want their enthusiastic consent and participation. You also want to look at a wide array of data. If you're trying to target a specific demographic because you think that they're not present in your community as is, I'd challenge you to look at what data you have, as well as to look at local census data without any kind of preconceived notions. Compare whatever data you might have currently with what your local geographic makeup is. If those two things don't line up, that's a really good way to start to see who you might be missing in your community, whether that's a socioeconomic class, whether that is certain minorities or certain disabilities. Census data is a really good indicator of where you can improve, where you're doing well, and where you could be going. You want to include the quantitative census information, hopefully with everything that's happening with the census right now. Hopefully that information is good, but being able to look at that information, because census data is self-reported, is really important, but also equally as important is that qualitative experiential data. And this is something that with the quantitative data, a lot of times funders ask for, what percentage of your audiences are coming to your access programming, or what percentage of your audiences identify as hard of hearing. But the qualitative data is going to tell you how you're doing and whether you're doing it okay or successfully. And the people that are going to be gathering that qualitative data are the staff members who are there on the front lines, the staff members who work with your customers on a daily basis. They'll have the experience of someone coming up to them after a show and saying this worked really well, or this didn't work really well. Making sure that that qualitative data and that quantitative data match up is really important. Another way to collect information that is probably, it's a classic example of the keep it simple method is NPS scores. And if you haven't worked with NPS scores before, I highly recommend them. It's a way of, instead of sending like a 4-page survey of how someone's experience was, NPS, which stands for Net Promoter Score, looks at one specific question. And that question is, how would you recommend us, or on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely would you be to recommend us to a friend? And this one question gets at the heart of whether or not someone had a good experience without asking specific questions about their bar experience, about their experience with the show. If someone is answering 10 out of 10, I'm going to recommend you every time to one of my friends, that's amazing. Those are the individuals that you want to capitalize on. The 9s and 10s in that field, those are considered, I'm completely having a brain fart, promoters, sorry. Net promoter score. Those are your promoters. Those are the people that are going to go out and be actively advocating for your organization. Anything under a 5, those are considered detractors, and the NPS score is taken by subtracting the percentage of detractors from the percent of promoters. The best companies in the world that do really well with this are somewhere along like 75 out of 100. That's where they're staying, and anything above that is exceptional. Anything under like 20 or 30 is pretty bad, but if you're anywhere in between there, you're doing pretty good. And again, you want to aim to have lived experience that matches your data. And a really clear example of this that I can give is I worked with my alma mater this past summer in navigating some of the issues that came up through the Black Lives Matter movement. I went to an all-girls school, and a lot of stories and painful traumatic events came out in the wake of the Black At movement. I'm not sure if any of you saw the Instagram accounts that spoke about Black students at private schools or even at public schools and their anonymous experiences with abuse, racial abuse, and aggressions during their time at those schools. I, along with several other alumni, went back and tried to talk to our school about doing right by this, by rectifying the information, rectifying those experiences. And one of the first walls of defense that came up was, well, we have all of this quantitative data about staff retention, about our percentages of minority attendance and re-enrollment, all of those things. And we were met with this wall of data that on a certain extent looked great. And they had been working towards those data marks. And all that was important was those data marks. And a lot of organizations operate on this because qualitative data is really hard to measure. But if all you have is quantitative data taken without any kind of context, it's not enough to determine whether or not an organization is successful. If the lived experience of the community members drastically differs from whatever quantitative data or whatever showcase data there is, that's not, you can't consider that quantitative data successful. And in fact, when the lived experience and the quantitative experience begin to match up, that's a phenomenal way of measuring success and being successful. Is I can say that we have, the most number of teachers of X background in the area, but if those teachers don't feel safe in their environment and they feel like they have been minoritized, that number doesn't necessarily matter. So again, in all that we do, when we're trying to do right by the individuals in our community who might be minoritized, who might not have experienced great things in art organizations, making sure that our quantitative data matches their lived experience is going to be the benchmarker for success. So let's take a step back and think, how do you grow attendance? This is going to assume that you already have access programming. If you don't, please feel free to reach out. We can talk about access programming at length about how to start them up. But one of the most common issues is organizations will build access programs from a place of great intent, but access is not something, and access programming specifically aren't, let me rephrase that. Access programming is not a concept of if you build it, they will come. Just simply having a closed caption performance does not entitle you to an audience of individuals who will utilize that service. This ties back into issues of individuals being traumatized, being forced to kind of advocate for themselves in the customer experience process, or being made to feel excluded where they are. And things that go a long way are, like what we talked about before, that method of radical hospitality, of improving customer experience overall, making sure that everyone feels included in your space, that their experience is good. Word of mouth is huge, but you can't really control word of mouth. So what are some quick win ways that you can grow attendance at your access programming without simply relying on word of mouth? Doctor's offices is one of the quickest wins, especially audiologists. Those, I think this data point might be a couple of years old, but individuals with hearing loss is the fastest growing disability demographic in the United States. And that largely comes from older populations losing hearing with age. And a lot of times what happens when people develop a disability later in life is they begin to self-select themselves out of things that they might have enjoyed previously. This is especially true when it comes to art, music, theater. If the primary way that you enjoy something is through a sense that you are losing, it can be very hard, depressing, tough to acknowledge that you're losing that. And it can be really sad to try to re-engage in a new way with something that you loved before. Those individuals might not necessarily even know that there are things like assistive listening devices, or that there are open captions, closed captions, things like open caption glasses, which are insane and very cool. And People's Light right outside of Philadelphia brought them from the UK to the US. Again, at the end of this, take down my email if you're interested in those, because new technology for access is amazing. And these are just a set of glasses that go over your own glasses, or if you don't wear glasses, with the captions in your line of sight. There's cool things happening on all fronts of access. But again, access is not an if you build it, they will come. There is a lot of initiative outreach work that needs to happen. So by getting some of your marketing materials out to places like an audiologist's office, you have the ability to get your organization into the sightlines of someone who may not have known that you had a program that was built just for them. And along with this, a lot of individuals, even if you build something, especially with relaxed performances, even if you build something and say, we want you here, we welcome you, this is really important to us, they might still choose to say, that's not for me. Making sure that you have educational marketing materials in doctors' offices, in places with people that your target demographics trust, like optometrists, pediatric offices, neurologists, assisted living facilities, local schools that focuses on developmental disabilities, community organizations for individuals on the spectrum. These are all ways you can get your organization in front of individuals that are your target audience in a way that might entice them to come, more than just sending out a flyer. Sending out a flyer doesn't work. It has to be more targeted than that. And it has to have a little bit more TLC. Again, you're going to get people that push back and say, oh, no, that's not for me. And it takes a lot of compassion and understanding and a willingness to listen to understand why they might say that, what trauma is coming with that, and what you can do as an organization to ensure that they feel safe. So these are short-term quick win potentials. The long-term answer is to invest in your community. It's not easy. It's a big picture, long-term thing. One of the things that you can do to ensure that you're working on that is to create a patron access advisory board. And if you forget everything I said today, creating a patron access advisory board, take this away. Take this, bring it back to your organization. But having a group of individuals that are invested in the success of your access programs that extend beyond just the range of the policymakers is so, so important. You can bring in people that are community partners. if they're vendors, if there are, local bakeries, bringing in people who might be able to strengthen that word of mouth, might be able to help learn about your programs and bring that to their own spaces. That's a great idea. Also, targeting anybody that is a current Access program patron or that has marked themselves as having an accessibility request, requirement, or need, asking those people to be a part of an advisory board or for any feedback. Say, what have we done right? What have we done wrong? But asking them directly, the people who already have experience with your programs, for feedback is scary. It may not get you the answers that you want. It may not get you clean, nice answers, but it will get you honest answers. And those perspectives are really important in trying to build a good engagement program. Any local ASL performers out in New Jersey, I think between Princeton and Philly, we probably used some of the same ASL performers. But having someone who is a performer in an access role on your board is another really great way of getting a different perspective that's not just about patrons, but about how do you make sure that your space for performers is open and inclusive as well. Most importantly, any conversation about your access patrons and about engagement needs to have anybody that deals with your customers face-to-face or phone-to-phone. This includes your development team, your marketing team, front of house, your volunteer corps, and your box office. Everybody needs to be on the same page and they need to be hearing the same information. It's so important that if you decide to adopt an engagement model that really focuses on access, that really cares about your patrons, commits to building an environment where you want people to come back time and time again, not just because they love the art that's being put on, but because they love the experience of coming to your space. All of these individuals need to be on the same page. They need to be empowered to act with agency on policies. They need to be empowered to understand what this community's role is within your organization and why accessibility is important to the ethos of your organization. So, lots of stuff we covered today. What are some of these things that you need to be successful? First, you need company-wide, community-wide, enthusiastic buy-in. I have worked in organizations where the volunteers were on board, the front of house was on board, but the higher-ups and the decision makers didn't really care enough. And no matter how hard your boots on the ground employees work, or one small conclave of individuals work, if there is not a holistic bottom to top and top to bottom buy-in of caring about patrons, creating a loyal environment, creating an inclusive environment, things will fall through the cracks. So getting the managing director on board, getting the board on board, and your volunteers. As I mentioned before, if you've got individuals on the flip side that are higher up, if you have board members and if you have a managing director that are really invested in creating an accessible, inclusive space, but you have front of house staff or volunteer corps that don't feel connected to the organization, don't feel valued, and don't really get it, doesn't matter how hard you try, it won't work. You also need compassion and a willingness to learn about the experiences of the individuals you're trying to target. I forget where I heard the quote, but one of the big things that comes across when you're working with people who have been marginalized or minoritized is there is a certain amount of trauma that comes with trying to advocate for yourself every time you go into a new space. And even though at our own organizations, we may not have been responsible for the trauma that our patrons have endured at other places, it is so important to recognize that a huge part of our role is in trying to heal and rise above that trauma. They might expect to be told that they can't have something, that they are being a burden, but if we operate on the fact that we are based in compassion, that these people are valued members of our community, that our patrons are a huge and important part of who we are as an institution, that will go a long way into healing some of that past trauma and making sure that that individual feels comfortable coming back. You also need advisors and stakeholders in this that have diverse perspectives. Just like in creating a patron access board, making sure that the people in the room that are making decisions, if everybody in the room that makes a decision about the importance of diversity in your institution is white, or everybody is male, or everybody is of one specific demographic, you won't be able to see the whole picture in a way that sets you up for success. It is so important to have diversity, not just on your stage, on the page, or in the art, but that diversity needs to resonate and permeate through the organization, from board members to senior staff to mid-staff to your volunteer court. And especially with your front of house staff, my personal ethos is, if you can't find yourself in the people who are there to be customer service representatives, it's going to be very hard for you to trust them that they have your best interests at heart. Having a very diverse front of house staff is so important to making sure that your customers feel included. You also need a way to be held accountable, and whether it's annual, semi-annual, those patron access board meetings, a newsletter, some kind of press releases, or a commitment to say every 6 months we're going to update you on these 3 initiatives we're doing. If you don't have a way to be held accountable from the beginning in your planning, you can do all the planning in the world, you can have the most solid plan, but if you don't have an action plan for accountability, everything will fall through. We all work in the arts. There is a very high turnover in front of house staff in your volunteer corps, and being able to set benchmarks and dates and times where you can evaluate whether or not something is working is the only way to keep integrity and engagement strategies alive and functioning well. You also need innovative outreach initiatives. We talked about that a little bit today. You can't just send out a flyer. Access is not an if you build it, they will come concept. It is so important that you reach out, be willing to educate the consumer on the programming that you've set in front, that you've created, and be willing to have some really tough conversations about why someone may not want to come into your space, in order to learn how to create a space that they do want to be in. So within the access community, there's a phrase that really resonates and kind of encapsulates everything we've talked about today. And it's this concept of, there's nothing about us without us. And again, this is from your volunteer corps, your patron access board, the art on stage, the people making the art, the people that are backstage. You need representation of individuals. And it's not just having a token person, it's not just checkboxing, because that's not doing something with integrity. Nothing about us without us speaks to getting perspectives in the room that historically might not have been there, in order to preserve a way of, or encourage individuals, new individuals into your spaces. And especially as we head into this really unsure time where we're without a vaccine, everybody hopefully is still wearing masks, but being in a public place with other people experiencing art, which is so important to so many of us, feels kind of scary. Giving agency to the people that you want to include, giving them something that tells them they are a stakeholder of the community, that they are involved, is a really good first start into the next stage of your institution as a whole. And that is it for today. Thank you folks so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Sarah.